What's up, history buffs? Today we're diving into the question nobody dares to ask. Julius Caesar, Rome's greatest conqueror, in bed and on the battlefield. And listen, I'm not talking about some sanitized textbook version where Caesar just crosses the Rubicon and gets stabbed on the Ides of March. Nope, we're going full throttle into the real Julius Caesar, the guy who literally slept his way to the top while simultaneously conquering half the known world. Smash that like button if you want the raw, unfiltered truth about history's most legendary power player. And let me know in the comments, do you think ambition or lust was Caesar's real driving force? Because by the end of this video, you're going to realize these two weren't separate at all. Here's the thing everyone gets wrong about Julius Caesar. They paint him as either this noble Roman statesman or this brilliant military tactician. But the real Caesar, he was basically the ancient world's ultimate alpha male who understood that power, sex, and conquest were all part of the same game, and he played that game better than anyone before or since. Picture this. You're living in Rome around 70 BCE. The Republic is a mess, politicians are corrupt as hell, and everyone's fighting for scraps of power. Into this chaos walks Gaius Julius Caesar, and this dude doesn't just want to play the game, he wants to rewrite the entire rulebook. But here's where it gets interesting. Caesar figured out something that most power-hungry men never realize. True conquest isn't just about armies and territory. It's about dominating every arena, political, military, and, sexual. The Romans had a word for this kind of total dominance: virtues. But Caesar took virtues to a whole different level. While other Roman generals were content to win battles, Caesar was out here winning hearts, minds, and bedrooms across the Mediterranean. He understood that in Rome, your sexual conquests were just as important as your military ones. Maybe more important. See, in Roman culture, being sexually dominant meant you were politically powerful. And Caesar, this guy turned seduction into a weapon of war. He didn't just conquer Gaul, he conquered the wives and daughters of his enemies, his allies, and pretty much anyone else who could advance his career. And the crazy part? It worked. Every affair, every scandal, every whispered rumor about Caesar's bedroom activities just made him more powerful, more feared, more legendary. But hold up. Before we dive deeper into Caesar's bedroom politics, let me ask you this. How far would you go for ultimate power? Drop a comment and let me know, because Caesar's answer to that question literally changed the course of human history. Now, most people think Caesar's story starts with his military campaigns in Gaul. Wrong. Caesar's path to total domination actually began in the bedrooms of Rome's most powerful women. And the first name on that list, Servilia Caepionis, the mother of Marcus Brutus. Yeah, that Brutus, the same guy who would eventually stab Caesar to death. Plot twist incoming, folks. Caesar's affair with Servilia wasn't just some casual fling. This was political warfare disguised as romance. Servilia was connected to the most powerful families in Rome, and by seducing her, Caesar was essentially infiltrating the enemy camp. Every pillow talk conversation was intelligence gathering. Every stolen kiss was a step closer to the consulship. And every night they spent together was Caesar collecting leverage over Rome's elite. The Romans called it adulterium, adultery, but Caesar turned it into an art form. He wasn't just cheating on his wives. Oh yeah, he had multiple wives, we'll get to that. He was systematically seducing his way through Rome's power structure like some kind of ancient political terminator. Real talk. This next part is going to sound absolutely bonkers, but stick with me. Caesar's sexual conquests weren't random. They were strategic, calculated. Every woman he pursued had something he needed: money, connections, information, or legitimacy. It was conquest disguised as seduction, and it was brilliant. And here's the kicker. While Caesar was busy turning Rome's bedrooms into his personal battlefield, he was also planning something that would make his sexual escapades look like child's play. Because Caesar had figured out the ultimate truth about power. Why choose between conquering in bed or on the battlefield when you could do both simultaneously? This is where our story takes a hard left turn, guys. Because what Caesar did next didn't just change Rome, it changed the entire concept of what it meant to be a conqueror, and it all started with one simple realization. The same skills that made you irresistible in the bedroom made you unstoppable on the battlefield. But that's just the beginning. If you're still with me, you're about to witness the most insane combination of military genius and sexual politics in human history, because Caesar was just getting started. All right, everyone, let's talk about how Caesar turned Rome into his personal dating app, except instead of swiping right, he was literally reshaping the political landscape one affair at a time. And trust me, this gets way more twisted than any reality TV show you've ever watched. So we left off with Caesar systematically working his way through Rome's elite women like he's collecting Pokemon cards. But here's what makes this absolutely diabolical. Caesar wasn't just some horn dog politician. This dude had a system, a method. He was basically running the ancient world's first political seduction masterclass. Let's break down Caesar's playbook, because this stuff is legendary. First rule of Caesar's game: never seduce down, always seduce up. Every woman he targeted was either richer, more connected, or more powerful than his last conquest. It was like he was climbing a ladder made of silk sheets and political favors. Second rule: make it scandalous enough to be memorable, but not so scandalous that it destroys you. Caesar walked this tightrope like a damn acrobat. He wanted people talking, whispering, spreading rumors, because in Rome, being talked about meant you mattered. And Caesar, this guy lived for being the center of attention. But here's where Caesar showed his true genius. He understood something about human psychology that most people miss even today. The same confidence, charisma, and dominance that made him irresistible to women made him absolutely magnetic to Roman voters. Think about it. If Caesar could seduce the most powerful women in Rome, what couldn't he accomplish? Hold up. Before we continue, drop a comment if you think Caesar was a strategic mastermind or just got lucky with his timing, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Enter Pompeia Sulla, Caesar's second wife, and oh boy, this marriage was a political power move disguised as romance. Pompeia came from one of Rome's most prestigious families, the Sullas, and marrying her was like Caesar buying a first-class ticket to the inner circle of Roman politics. But plot twist, Caesar didn't marry her for love, he married her for access. See, in Rome, your wife's family connections were just as important as your own, maybe more important. By marrying Pompeia, Caesar wasn't just getting a wife. He was getting an entire network of political allies, financial backers, and social legitimacy. It was like a hostile takeover, except instead of buying stocks, he was saying, "I do." But Caesar being Caesar, he couldn't just settle down and play house. Oh no. While he's married to Pompeia, he's still carrying on his affair with Servilia. And not just casually, we're talking about love letters, expensive gifts, secret meetings. The man was basically running a parallel relationship like some kind of ancient soap opera villain. And the Romans? They ate this stuff up. Every scandal, every rumor, every whisper about Caesar's love life just made him more famous, more talked about, more powerful. It was like he figured out that controversy equals currency, and he was collecting interest on every affair. But here's the really crazy part, and this is where things get absolutely bonkers. Caesar's sexual reputation actually helped his military career. Roman soldiers respected commanders who were sexually dominant because it proved they were alpha males. Caesar's troops didn't just follow him because he was a good general. They followed him because he was a legend, a guy who could conquer both enemy territories and enemy wives. Real talk, this next part sounds like something out of a movie, but it's 100% historically accurate. Caesar's soldiers used to sing songs about his sexual conquests while they marched. Not just his military victories, his bedroom victories. They literally turned his affairs into marching songs. Can you imagine being so legendary that your own army writes fan fiction about your love life? And Caesar loved it. He encouraged it. Because he understood that in the ancient world, sexual prowess and military prowess were connected. A general who could seduce anyone could probably conquer anything. It was psychological warfare at its finest. But buckle up, Buttercup, because Caesar was about to take this whole conquest through seduction strategy to an entirely new level. We're talking about affairs that would reshape the Mediterranean, scandals that would topple governments, and seductions that would literally change the course of human history. And it all starts with one woman who would prove that Caesar had met his match. Not on the battlefield, but in the bedroom. A woman so powerful, so dangerous, so absolutely captivating that she would nearly destroy everything Caesar had worked for. Or maybe she would help him achieve his ultimate dream of total domination. Spoiler alert, it's complicated. And it's about to get way more interesting. Pause the video right now and guess what happens next. I'll give you a hint. It involves the most powerful woman in the ancient world, enough drama to fuel a dozen Netflix series, and a scandal so explosive it nearly ended Caesar's career before he even got started. Give up. All right, let me introduce you to Cleopatra VII of Egypt. And no, this isn't the Hollywood version with Elizabeth Taylor. The real Cleopatra was something else entirely. A political mastermind who spoke 9 languages, had a PhD-level education in mathematics and philosophy, and oh yeah, happened to control the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean. But here's what's absolutely wild about Caesar meeting Cleopatra. For the first time in his life, Caesar wasn't the one doing the seducing. Cleopatra took one look at this Roman general who thought he was hot stuff and basically said, "Hold my wine and watch this." Picture the scene. Caesar arrives in Alexandria in 48 BCE, chasing his rival Pompey. He's expecting to find some exotic foreign queen he can charm and manipulate, like all the Roman women he's been collecting. Instead, Cleopatra has herself smuggled into his quarters wrapped in a carpet. Not because she's helpless, but because she wanted to make an entrance that would blow his mind. And it worked. Caesar, the guy who had seduced half of Rome's elite, was completely blindsided. Cleopatra didn't just meet his energy, she exceeded it. She was richer, smarter, more powerful in her own domain, and she knew it. For the first time, Caesar was dealing with an equal. Now listen up, because this is where Caesar's story gets really insane. Most people think the Caesar-Cleopatra affair was just about lust and politics. Wrong. This was 2 apex predators recognizing each other and deciding whether to fight or team up to rule the world. Literally, Cleopatra needed Rome's military might to secure her throne. Caesar needed Egypt's wealth to fund his political ambitions. But instead of some boring political alliance, they turned it into the most legendary love affair in human history. These two didn't just fall for each other. They fell for each other's ambitions. And the sex... oh man, the sex was apparently legendary. We're talking about 2 people who were used to being the most charismatic person in any room, competing to out-seduce each other. Caesar's previous affairs were strategic business transactions. This was 2 masters of seduction trying to outgame each other in bed. But here's where things get really wild. And this is going to sound absolutely bonkers, but stick with me. Caesar and Cleopatra didn't just have an affair. They had a son, Caesarion. And that kid represented something that terrified every Roman politician, a potential heir who could claim both Roman and Egyptian power. Think about it. Caesar's entire political career was built on careful calculation and strategic moves. But with Cleopatra, he did something completely reckless. He created a potential successor who could unite the 2 greatest powers in the ancient world. That wasn't just passion. That was either the most brilliant long-term strategy in history or Caesar completely losing his mind. The Romans? They absolutely lost their shit. Here was their golden boy Caesar, the guy who was supposed to conquer foreigners, and instead he's having a very public affair with the most powerful foreign queen alive. It was like finding out Captain America was dating the leader of Hydra, but Caesar didn't care. For the first time in his calculating strategic life, he was doing something purely because he wanted to, and what he wanted was Cleopatra. Not just her body, not just her money, not just her political connections. He wanted her mind, her power, her absolute refusal to be conquered by anyone. Real talk. Do you think Caesar genuinely fell in love, or was this all still part of his master plan? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because honestly, historians are still arguing about this 2,000 years later. Here's what we know for sure. Caesar spent months in Egypt when he should have been back in Rome, securing his political position. He took luxury cruises down the Nile with Cleopatra when he should have been planning his next military campaign. He had a kid with a foreign queen when he should have been building alliances with Roman families. Either Caesar had completely lost his strategic mind, or he was playing a game so complex that nobody else could see the moves. And knowing Caesar, it was probably both. But this is where our story takes another hard left turn, because Caesar's Egyptian vacation was about to come to a very abrupt end. Rome was calling, his enemies were circling, and Caesar was about to learn that even the greatest conqueror in history couldn't have everything he wanted. The question was, would he choose Rome or Egypt, power or love, his political career or the woman who had finally matched his ambition? And his answer, well, that's where Caesar proved he was still Caesar, no matter how much Cleopatra had gotten under his skin. What's about to happen next is going to completely redefine everything you thought you knew about ambition, because Caesar just pulled off the most audacious political maneuver in human history. And it all started with a single decision that proved he was willing to risk literally everything for ultimate power. Caesar chose Rome, but here's the twist. He didn't abandon Cleopatra. Instead, this absolute madman decided he was going to have both, Rome and Egypt. Political power and the woman of his dreams, the consulship and the most legendary affair in history. Because Caesar had figured out something that nobody else dared to even imagine. Why choose when you can conquer everything? So what does Caesar do? He brings Cleopatra to Rome. Not secretly, not quietly. He literally moves the Queen of Egypt into a villa across the Tiber River and starts living openly as both a Roman politician and the consort of a foreign queen. The balls on this guy were absolutely astronomical. Picture this, you're a Roman senator, and you wake up one morning to find out that Julius Caesar, your colleague, your rival, your political equal, has basically set up house with the richest, most powerful woman in the world. And she's not Roman. She's not even trying to be Roman. She's showing up to public events dressed like an Egyptian goddess, speaking in her native language and acting like she owns the place. The Roman elite were absolutely losing their minds. Here was Caesar, violating every unwritten rule of Roman politics and somehow getting away with it. It was like he was daring them to try and stop him while simultaneously proving that he was operating on a completely different level than everyone else. But hold up. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you this. Have you ever met someone so confident that they made you question your entire worldview? Drop a comment if you have, because that's exactly what Caesar was doing to the entire Roman Republic. Now, while Caesar's living his best life with Cleopatra in Rome, he's not neglecting his other interests. Remember Servilia? Caesar's still maintaining that relationship too. And his wife, Calpurnia. Oh yeah, he married a third time while all this was going down. Caesar was literally managing a harem of the most powerful women in the ancient world, and somehow making it work. But here's where Caesar's sexual politics reached their absolute peak of insanity. He was using his relationships with these women to play different factions of Roman politics against each other. Servilia gave him intelligence about the conservative senators. Cleopatra provided unlimited funding for his political campaigns. Calpurnia connected him to the younger generation of Roman aristocrats. It was like Caesar had turned his love life into a political intelligence network, and every woman he was sleeping with was unknowingly working for him. The man had weaponized seduction to a degree that would make Machiavelli weep with envy. Real talk. This next part is going to sound like something out of House of Cards, but it's completely historically accurate. Caesar was simultaneously planning military campaigns, managing political alliances, and coordinating multiple romantic relationships, all while positioning himself to become the most powerful man in Rome. And it was working. Caesar's combination of military genius, political cunning, and sexual charisma was making him unstoppable. His enemies couldn't attack his military record because it was flawless. They couldn't attack his political positions because he had built an unbeatable coalition. And they couldn't attack his personal life because Roman culture actually respected sexual dominance. Caesar had achieved something that nobody in Roman history had ever accomplished. He had made himself simultaneously indispensable and untouchable. He was the general Rome needed for military campaigns, the politician Rome needed for stability, and the alpha male Rome needed to prove its superiority over other cultures. But buckle up, Buttercup, because Caesar's enemies were about to prove that even the most perfect political strategy has a weakness. And that weakness wasn't military, it wasn't political, it was personal. See, Caesar had made one crucial miscalculation in his rise to power. He assumed that because he could seduce anyone, manipulate anyone, and outmaneuver anyone, he was invincible. But there was one person he had never quite been able to fully control. One relationship that had always been more complicated than he wanted to admit. And that person was about to become the key to Caesar's downfall. Not because they hated Caesar, but because they loved him too much to let him destroy the republic they both believed in. If you're still with me, you're about to witness the most tragic irony in political history, because the man who conquered through seduction was about to be destroyed by the one person whose love he had taken for granted. And that betrayal? It wasn't coming from an enemy, it was coming from family. Listen up, because what I'm about to tell you is so twisted that if it happened in a movie, you'd say it was too unrealistic. Remember Servilia, Caesar's longtime mistress, the mother of Marcus Brutus. Well, turns out that having an affair with someone's mom and then treating their son like family creates some pretty complex psychological dynamics. Marcus Brutus wasn't just Caesar's political protege. This kid had grown up with Caesar as a father figure while Caesar was literally sleeping with his mother. Talk about your complicated family dynamics. Caesar mentored Brutus, advanced his career, treated him like the son he never had with a Roman woman. And Brutus, he worshipped Caesar like a god. But here's where this story gets absolutely diabolical. Caesar's relationship with Brutus was built on the ultimate lie. Every time Caesar gave Brutus advice, promoted his career, or treated him with paternal affection, there was this unspoken truth hanging in the air. Caesar was banging his mom on the regular, and everyone knew it. The entire Roman Senate knew that Caesar's mentorship of Brutus was really just an extension of his sexual conquest of Servilia. Brutus was living proof of Caesar's power to dominate not just women, but entire family lines. It was psychological warfare disguised as family dinner. Now you might be thinking, okay, but Brutus was getting ahead in his career, so what's the problem? The problem is that Brutus had principles, real, genuine, idealistic principles about the Roman Republic. And as Caesar got more powerful, more dictatorial, more willing to break traditions for his own benefit, Brutus started to realize something horrifying. The man he loved like a father was destroying the thing they both supposedly believed in. The Republic. Hold up, before we continue, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to choose between loyalty to a person and loyalty to your principles? because that's exactly the impossible position Caesar put Brutus in, and it was about to tear both of them apart. Here's what makes this whole situation even more twisted. Caesar genuinely loved Brutus. Not strategically, not politically, genuinely. Caesar saw in Brutus everything he wished he could have been, idealistic, principled, uncorrupted by ambition. Caesar's relationship with Brutus was the one pure thing in his otherwise calculating life. But Caesar being Caesar, he couldn't resist using that love as another tool for power. Every time the Senate questioned Caesar's growing authority, he would point to Brutus's support as proof that even the most principled Romans backed his leadership. Caesar was literally using Brutus's love against him, turning it into political capital. And Brutus, this poor kid, was trapped in the most psychologically complex situation in political history. He owed his career to Caesar. He genuinely loved Caesar as a father figure. But he was also watching Caesar systematically destroy everything Brutus believed the Republic should represent. Real talk. This next part is going to sound absolutely bonkers, but historians have actual evidence for this. Brutus started receiving anonymous letters telling him that his ancestors would be ashamed of him for supporting a dictator. These letters weren't from Caesar's enemies. They were from Roman citizens who saw Brutus as their last hope for preserving the Republic. The pressure was incredible. On one side, you had Caesar, the man who had shaped Brutus's entire life, who trusted him completely, who genuinely cared about him. On the other side, you had the ideals of the Republic that Brutus's famous ancestor had died to establish centuries earlier. But here's the kicker. And this is where Caesar's sexual politics finally came back to bite him. Brutus started to see his relationship with Caesar differently. Instead of a beloved mentor, he started to see Caesar as a predator who had seduced not just his mother, but his entire family's loyalty. Every favor Caesar had done for Brutus suddenly looked like manipulation. Every piece of career advice looked like grooming. Every moment of paternal affection looked like Caesar buying Brutus's silence about the affair with Servilia. And slowly, painfully, Brutus came to a realization that would change everything. Caesar hadn't been treating him like a son. Caesar had been treating him like property. The man who had conquered through seduction, who had turned every relationship into a strategic advantage, who had weaponized love itself for political gain, was about to learn that some bonds run deeper than manipulation. Because Brutus was about to make a choice that would prove love and loyalty aren't the same thing. And that choice was going to cost Caesar everything he had spent his entire life building. Plot twist incoming, folks. The greatest seducer in Roman history was about to be undone by the one person whose love was so pure that it couldn't be corrupted, even by Caesar himself. All right, everyone, buckle up because we're about to witness the most brutal irony in human history. The man who spent his entire career conquering through seduction was about to be destroyed by the purest form of love imaginable. And it's going to happen in the most public, most humiliating way possible. March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March. Caesar wakes up next to Calpurnia, his third wife, who's been having nightmares about his death for weeks. She's begging him not to go to the Senate meeting. She's literally grabbing onto him, crying, telling him that every omen points to disaster. And what does Caesar do? He brushes her off. Because Caesar had spent so many years manipulating women's emotions for political gain that he couldn't recognize genuine fear when he saw it. The greatest reader of human psychology in Roman history completely missed the fact that his wife was trying to save his life. But here's where it gets really twisted. As Caesar's walking to the Senate, he's feeling pretty good about himself. His latest military campaigns have been successful. His political position seems secure. Cleopatra and their son are safely installed in Rome. His affair with Servilia is still giving him intelligence about the conservative senators. Everything is going according to plan. Caesar had no idea that his entire support network was about to collapse in the most spectacular way possible. Now pause the video right now and think about this. Have you ever been so confident in your abilities that you completely missed obvious warning signs? Because that's exactly what happened to the smartest politician in Roman history. The conspirators are waiting for Caesar in the theatre of Pompey. 60 senators, all armed with daggers, all committed to ending Caesar's life. But here's the thing that's absolutely diabolical about this assassination. It wasn't just about removing a dictator. It was about sending a message about the consequences of treating human relationships like political tools. Every single conspirator had a personal reason to hate Caesar. Some had been humiliated by his military victories. Others had been outmaneuvered in political battles. But most of them, they were there because Caesar had seduced, manipulated, or betrayed someone they loved. Caesar walks into that room thinking he's surrounded by colleagues and allies. What he was actually walking into was a room full of men whose wives, daughters, sisters, or mothers had been casualties of Caesar's sexual political strategy. But the moment that breaks my heart every time I think about it, when Caesar sees Brutus among the conspirators. Picture this. Caesar's being stabbed by 60 senators, blood everywhere, chaos, screaming. And through all of that, Caesar's eyes find Brutus, the kid he mentored, the son he never had, the one person whose love Caesar thought was unconditional. And Caesar doesn't say, et tu, Brute, like Shakespeare wrote. According to historians, Caesar's actual last words were even more heartbreaking. Kai su teknon, you too, my child. Think about that for a second. Caesar's dying words weren't about politics or power or even self-preservation. They were about love, about the crushing realization that the person he cared about most had chosen principles over personal loyalty. Real talk. This moment represents something that goes way deeper than just political assassination. This was the ultimate consequence of treating love as a weapon. Caesar had spent his entire life manipulating emotions for strategic advantage, and in the end, genuine love destroyed him, precisely because he couldn't understand it. Brutus didn't kill Caesar because he hated him. Brutus killed Caesar because he loved him too much to watch him destroy the Republic. It was the most tragic form of love imaginable, love that was willing to destroy itself to save what it believed in. And here's the kicker that makes this whole story even more insane. As Caesar's bleeding out on the Senate floor, surrounded by the bodies of his political enemies, he's not thinking about his military victories or his political achievements. He's thinking about Brutus, about how he failed to understand that some people can't be seduced, manipulated, or conquered because their principles run deeper than their personal relationships. Caesar died realizing that his greatest strength, his ability to turn every human connection into a strategic advantage, had been his fatal flaw. He had become so good at using love as a weapon that he forgot how to recognize love as a genuine emotion. But if you think that's where this story ends, you're dead wrong, because Caesar's death wasn't the conclusion of his conquest strategy. It was just the beginning of its ultimate evolution. And this is where our story takes its most unexpected turn yet, because Caesar's assassination was about to unleash something that would prove his methods were even more powerful than he realized. Even in death, Caesar was about to seduce his way to immortality. What I'm about to tell you is going to completely flip everything you thought you knew about power, because Caesar just pulled off the most insane, posthumous power play in human history. The man literally turned his own assassination into the ultimate seduction of an entire empire. Here's what the conspirators thought would happen. Caesar dies, the Republic is restored. Everyone goes back to the good old days of senatorial rule, and Caesar becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition. Here's what actually happened. Caesar's death turned him into a god. Literally. Within hours of the assassination, something absolutely wild started happening in Rome. Instead of celebrating Caesar's death, the Roman people were losing their minds with grief and rage. The conspirators had completely miscalculated how the average Roman felt about Caesar. See, while the Senate was worried about Caesar destroying the Republic, regular Romans had been living their best lives under Caesar's rule. He had given them land, money, entertainment, and military victories. To them, Caesar wasn't a dictator. He was the best leader Rome had ever had. But here's where Caesar's sexual politics created the most unexpected consequence. All those affairs, all those scandals, all those rumors about his bedroom activities had made Caesar larger than life in the popular imagination. He wasn't just a politician, he was a legend, a mythical figure who could conquer anyone and anything. Hold up, before we dive deeper, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen someone become more powerful after they died than they ever were when they were alive? Drop a comment if you can think of anyone, because Caesar basically invented this phenomenon. The funeral was absolutely insane. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and political heir, gave a speech that was basically a masterclass in emotional manipulation. He read Caesar's will, which left money to every Roman citizen. He showed Caesar's bloody toga to the crowd. He reminded everyone of Caesar's military victories and his generosity to the people. But the stroke of genius? Antony brought up Caesar's relationships with Cleopatra and Servilia. Not to shame Caesar, but to prove that even the most powerful women in the world had been unable to resist him. Caesar's sexual conquests became evidence of his superhuman charisma and power. The crowd went absolutely berserk. They didn't just mourn Caesar, they deified him. They started a riot that nearly burned down Rome. They hunted down the conspirators like animals. They demanded that Caesar be declared a god and worshipped throughout the empire. And the Senate, the same senators who had spent years plotting Caesar's downfall, were suddenly tripping over themselves to vote for his deification. Because the alternative was facing the wrath of an entire population that had decided Caesar was immortal. Real talk. This next part is going to sound like something out of a superhero movie, but it's completely historically accurate. Within a few years of his death, Caesar had temples built in his honor, priests dedicated to his worship, and an entire religious cult centered around his divine nature. But here's the really twisted part. Caesar's assassination had accomplished something his living political career never could. It had united the entire Roman world around his memory. Conservatives who had opposed him in life were now claiming to be his true heirs. Populists who had supported him were using his name to justify their policies. Military commanders were invoking his spirit to inspire their troops. Caesar had become more than a man, he had become an idea, and that idea was unstoppable. But wait, it gets even more insane. Remember Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir. This kid was only 18 when Caesar died, but he immediately understood something that all the experienced politicians missed. Caesar's death hadn't ended his power, it had perfected it. Octavian started calling himself Divi Filius, son of the divine. He claimed that Caesar's spirit was guiding his actions. He used Caesar's name and reputation to build a political movement that would eventually conquer the entire Mediterranean world. And the crazy part? It worked. Within 15 years, Octavian had become Augustus, the first Roman emperor, ruling over an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt, and he did it all by claiming to be Caesar's spiritual and political heir. Caesar had figured out the ultimate truth about power. It's not about what you accomplish in life, it's about what people believe you represent after you're gone. And Caesar's combination of military genius, political cunning, and legendary sexual charisma had created a mythology that was more powerful than any living person could ever be. But if you think that's the end of this story, you're wrong. Because Caesar's influence was about to extend far beyond Rome, far beyond his own era, far beyond anything he could have imagined when he was alive. The man who conquered Gaul, seduced Egypt, and revolutionized Roman politics was about to achieve something even more impressive. He was going to conquer time itself. Listen up, because what I'm about to show you is going to blow your mind about how one man's approach to power literally shaped the next 2,000 years of human civilization. Caesar didn't just conquer Rome. He conquered the entire concept of leadership itself. Here's something that's going to sound absolutely insane, but is 100% true. Every single powerful leader since Caesar has basically been copying his playbook. The combination of military dominance, political cunning, and sexual charisma that Caesar perfected, that became the template for what we expect from alpha leaders even today. Think about it. Napoleon, military genius with legendary affairs and a larger-than-life personality. JFK, charismatic politician with famous sexual conquests and mythical status. Even fictional characters like James Bond are basically Caesar fantasies. The guy who can seduce anyone, defeat anyone, and charm his way out of any situation. Caesar invented the archetype of the ultimate alpha male, and we're still living in his shadow. But here's where this gets really twisted. Caesar's influence goes way beyond just inspiring other leaders. His approach to combining personal relationships with political power literally created the blueprint for modern celebrity culture. Caesar was the first person in history to understand that being talked about was more important than being respected. That scandal could be more valuable than success. That your personal life could be your greatest political weapon if you played it right. Sound familiar? That's because every modern celebrity, influencer, and political figure is using Caesar's strategy. Create a larger-than-life persona, generate constant buzz about your personal relationships, and turn controversy into currency. Hold up. Drop a comment and tell me, can you think of any modern figure who uses personal drama to stay relevant? Because I guarantee you they're using tactics that Caesar invented 2,000 years ago. Now here's the really mind-blowing part. Caesar's sexual politics didn't just influence individual leaders. They changed how entire societies think about power and gender. Caesar proved that sexual dominance and political dominance were connected, and that idea has been shaping human civilization ever since. Look at any culture's mythology about great leaders, and you'll find Caesar's fingerprints all over it. The king who seduces the enemy queen. The warrior who conquers both kingdoms and hearts. The politician whose personal magnetism makes him irresistible. These aren't just random stories. They're variations on the Caesar template. But Caesar's ultimate victory goes even deeper than cultural influence. Remember how he combined conquest and seduction into a single strategy? That approach literally became the foundation of Western imperialism. Real talk. This next part might make you uncomfortable, but it's historically accurate. European colonialism was basically Caesar's strategy applied on a global scale. European powers didn't just want to conquer other territories militarily. They wanted to seduce local populations into accepting Western culture, values, and power structures. The same psychological tactics Caesar used on individual women and political rivals, European empires used on entire civilizations. Military dominance combined with cultural seduction, backed up by the promise of joining the superior civilization if you submitted to its power. It's Caesar's playbook scaled up to continental proportions. But here's where Caesar's influence gets absolutely diabolical. Even the way we think about historical greatness is shaped by Caesar's approach to building his own legend. Caesar was the first historical figure to actively manage his own reputation for posterity. He wrote his own accounts of his military campaigns. He cultivated relationships with poets and historians who would immortalize his achievements. He understood that controlling the narrative was just as important as winning the battles. Every great man biography you've ever read, every historical documentary about legendary leaders, every movie about conquering heroes, They're all following the template Caesar created for how powerful people should be remembered. Caesar didn't just change history, he changed how history gets written. And the absolute kicker, Caesar's name literally became synonymous with ultimate power. Kaiser in German, Czar in Russian. These aren't just linguistic coincidences, they're proof that Caesar's concept of absolute authority became the standard that every subsequent empire tried to achieve. But if you think Caesar's influence stops at politics and culture, you're wrong. Because the man who turned seduction into a weapon of war was about to achieve something even more impressive. He was going to prove that his approach to conquest could transcend death, time, and even reality itself. And this final revelation about Caesar's ultimate victory, it's going to change how you think about power, ambition, and human nature forever. All right, folks, we've reached the end of our journey, and I'm about to reveal Caesar's ultimate secret, the one thing that made him truly the greatest conqueror in human history. And it's not what you think. Caesar's greatest conquest wasn't Gaul, it wasn't Egypt, it wasn't even Rome itself. Caesar's greatest conquest was something far more powerful, far more lasting, and far more terrifying than any military victory. He conquered human psychology itself. Think about everything we've covered. Caesar figured out that power isn't about controlling territories or armies. It's about controlling how people think and feel about dominance. He understood that the same psychological triggers that make someone sexually attracted to you also make them want to follow you politically. Confidence, dominance, charisma, the ability to make people feel special when you choose them and desperate when you don't. Caesar weaponized the most fundamental aspects of human attraction and turned them into tools of conquest. And here's the absolutely diabolical part. It's still working. Right now, in the 21st century, we're still using Caesar's playbook without even realizing it. Every time someone gains power through a combination of controversy and charisma, that's Caesar. Every time a leader uses their personal relationships to build political alliances, that's Caesar. Every time someone turns scandal into strength, that's Caesar. The man has been dead for over 2,000 years, and he's still teaching us how to seduce our way to power. But hold up. Before we wrap this up, let me ask you the ultimate question. Was Caesar a genius or a monster? Drop your honest opinion in the comments, because this question has been dividing people for literally 2 millennia. Here's my take. Caesar was both. He was a genius because he understood human nature better than anyone before or since. He figured out that love and power, sex and politics, personal relationships and public achievement are all connected at a fundamental psychological level. But he was also a monster because he used that knowledge to manipulate everyone around him. Every relationship was a transaction. Every emotion was a tool. Every human connection was a step toward greater power. Caesar proved that if you're willing to treat other people as objects to be conquered, rather than individuals to be respected, you can achieve almost unlimited power. The question is, what does that cost your soul? And this brings us to Caesar's final, most disturbing victory. He proved that in the contest between love and power, power usually wins. Not because power is stronger than love, but because power is willing to corrupt love to achieve its goals. Caesar's affairs weren't just about lust. They were about proving that even the most intimate human emotions could be weaponized for political advantage. His relationships with Servilia, Cleopatra, and even Brutus were all examples of how someone with enough charisma and ruthlessness can turn love itself into a conquest. Real talk. This is why Caesar's story is still relevant today. We live in a world where personal charisma can be more powerful than expertise, where scandal can be more valuable than achievement, where the ability to dominate social media can matter more than the ability to govern effectively. Caesar didn't just conquer the ancient world, he created the template for how power works in the modern world. But here's the ultimate irony. Caesar's greatest victory and his greatest failure were the same thing. By turning every human relationship into a strategic advantage, he achieved unprecedented power, but he also guaranteed that he would die alone, surrounded by people who had loved him but could no longer trust him. Caesar conquered everyone except the one person who mattered most, himself. He became so good at manipulating others that he lost the ability to form genuine connections. He was the most powerful man in the world, and also the loneliest. So what's the lesson here? Maybe it's that there are two kinds of conquest. The kind that brings you power, and the kind that brings you happiness. Caesar mastered the first, but never understood the second. Or maybe the lesson is simpler. Be careful what you conquer, because eventually it might conquer you back. What do you think? Was Caesar Rome's greatest conqueror, or was he conquered by his own ambition? Let me know in the comments below. And if this deep dive into history's most fascinating power player blew your mind, smash that like button, hit subscribe for more stories about the crazy people who shaped our world, and ring that notification bell. Because trust me, there are way more insane historical stories where this came from. Until next time, remember, history isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding why it still matters today. And Caesar? He matters because he figured out something about human nature that we're still trying to understand. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.